Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
I will never get bored of that introduction, and perhaps I'm biased because I'm the one that put it together. But just I don't speak Spanish, or at least I'm learning to. But if I need people to stand away from the doors, I can do the Spanish version. It's quite simple. Hello, welcome everyone to episode 3 of Monorail Memoirs. This week we'll be discussing the topic of should Walt Disney World have a fifth gate? Obviously, there's 4 gates already. 6 maybe if you want to include the water parks, but we're going to talk about, does it need a fifth gate? What reasons might there be against having a fifth gate? And then we're going to do a little bit of creative design to talk about what we think that fifth gate could be. But before we get into that, Lauren, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Well, I ran 16 miles this morning. I took a week off. I don't know why you're shaking your head. You did a marathon a few weeks ago, but and I was sort of suffering by about mile 14, I'll be honest. Which again, at some point, we'll talk more about the Run Disney adventure and how much that cost and the experience that it was. But that's for a later episode. I do, however, have feedback on last week's episode, mainly from my wife. It was made very clear to me, in no uncertain terms, how wrong I was by not putting Animal Kingdom as the number 1 park. I was told that I didn't include anything about the food. I didn't include enough about the giraffes, which happens to be her favorite animal. I didn't mention the affection section on Rafiki's Planet Watch, where you can go pet some goats. So I'm clearly in the wrong, and actually the best, they ignored it, the whole 45-minute episode. All of my input was wrong, apparently, because the best park at Walt Disney World is Animal Kingdom. And hopefully when this goes out and she watches this, she will agree that I have made up for my distinct agreedances and sins, and hopefully she'll crack on. But yeah, I'm doing fine now. I'm doing fine. Thank you, Lauren. Fifth gate then. So first, let's talk about, does Walt Disney World need a fifth gate? We've seen the crowd sizes in the last 2 decades increase significantly. We've seen the cost go up as well, but have we seen the offering go up? So we'll go straight blue sky thinking. Lauren, does Walt Disney World need a fifth gate?
Yes. Purely for the amount of people going to Walt Disney World at the moment, the queue sizes are just so horrific. It makes it undoable, really. We've done all of them before, pretty much. Even though there's new things popping up all the time, we can focus our energy on the new stuff because we've already done all the old stuff. But if you think about that family who are going for a 2 weeks, once in a lifetime holiday, how on earth are they meant to enjoy it, really, when they're waiting in queues 50, 60, 70 minutes long?
Whilst true, do you not think, though, that for that family who are doing a once-in-a-lifetime visit, if you open up a fifth gate, what you're doing there is you're actually sort of making it harder to achieve attending everything? Or do you think it's going to spread the crowd out significantly enough that it will help mitigate the queue sizes elsewhere?
I think it would make people return.
Interesting. Go on.
So that family that are doing the once-in-a-lifetime experience, if they experience 30 to 40-minute waits and they haven't managed to do it all, I guarantee they would feel better doing that and thinking, oh, can we squeeze it again in another 5 years' time, or, something like that, rather than, gosh, we cannot do that again. We waited in all those queues. The heat was horrendous. It's about the perception for me, more so than being able to do it all, because we all know you can't possibly do all of Walt Disney World in 2 weeks or one holiday, regardless of how long it is. So
I agree, but I just got to draw back slightly though. If it's once in a lifetime, why would they be coming back?
But that's the thing. It would make it not once in a lifetime if they had such a good experience. They may be able to financially do it in another 10 years' time.
Yeah, possibly so. And it's worth pointing out that this conversation is happening in the backdrop of Epic Universe's rollout in Universal Orlando. This is their third gate. well, it depends if you want to include water parks. We're not doing, so it's their third gate, and they've made a real effort, not just in terms of traditional media, but also getting YouTube stars, getting social media influencers to go there for early previews. The hype around it has been significant, and whilst I've yet to attend, I've heard nothing but good things. There have been some Disney loyalists who perhaps argue against Epic Universe, but as far as I'm concerned, it's going to drive competition. And if it drives competition, if Disney starts seeing an impact to their bottom line because people are spending more time at Universal and less time at Disney, or possibly even all their time at Universal and no time at Disney, there is going to have to be innovation. But Disney's already 5 years behind on this. I think most people would argue in favor of having a fifth gate. But let's just talk for a minute about some of the reasons why we maybe shouldn't. In our last episode, we spoke about some of the areas of the parks that are needing upgrades. You look at Tomorrowland in Magic Kingdom. Is having a fifth gate going to take money away from these upgrades that are required? And so surely then we're just perpetuating the same problem we're currently in, which is there are too many areas of the 4 theme parks that are run down. What do you think?
I do get what you're saying, yeah, definitely. And I think it's something that not a lot of people consider. They're always thinking about the new thing. They're always thinking about how can we, expand, not how can we get better. So I think that obviously, I think fifth gate would be helpful, but people jump to yes, it's new, it's exciting. But do we actually need to focus that energy more on the older stuff that is looking a little bit tired?
Yeah, it is, because when you think of how much money would have to be diverted, or at least possibly even generated, to make a whole new fifth gate, you're talking tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and minimum 5 years. And that's why Disney, I would argue, is currently on the back foot slightly compared to Universal. Is Disney going to maintain the largest market share, especially in Orlando? Of course they are. But if they see percentage points, single digit, possibly double digits, being knocked off their attendance in favor of going to Epic Universe and the rest of Orlando, Universal Orlando, there may be some high-level conversations in the C-suite. One of the other concerns, though, is there's only so many people that live in Orlando, and staffing concerns have already been a bit of an issue when Epic Universe came about, and the discussions about upping the actual wages of those in attendance. There was a YouTube documentary people can visit about the dark side of Walt Disney World. It was filmed a few years ago by, I believe it was the German national broadcaster DW, and it talks about how there are people who work in the Walt Disney company who are either living in hotels or, in some more extreme cases, living in their cars. Now, we've known that's a case in California for some time due to the cost of living there. But could you imagine having to, work full-time, 40+ hours a week, and all you can afford is to live in a hotel room? Like, staffing concerns are a real issue here. So if we're opening a fifth gate, are we only going to make those issues worse, trying to get people who, in fact, either don't want to be there, or there's simply not enough people to go around? So that's something to consider. But here's what I will throw to you then, Lauren. If there was to be a fifth gate, this is where we can get into some sort of conceptual thinking. What sort of themes or things would you like to see in a fifth gate?
I think I would like to see more originality rather than leaning on those IPs. Now, I don't know what sort of originality it could be. And obviously with Epic Universe coming about, it is all about IPs, Super Mario, How to Train Your Dragon, etc., etc. It's all about those things that we know that people love, which will bring people in. You want to immerse yourself in those worlds that you've played with or you've watched on TV. But surely going back to the core of what Walt Disney World is, it's not an IP. It's not based on a film or anything like that.
I was having this thought after last week's episode. Yes, but then you look at some of the original rides, you think about Snow White, you think about Winnie the Pooh, you think about Peter Pan. Aren't they just IP? But because we're in a generation that associated that with classic Disney, with old Disney, aren't they just IP anyway?
Yeah, you're right, I suppose. Yeah, I didn't really think about that. I was thinking more towards, Epcot and what that was originally. Very little in terms of IP was there, if any.
I get that, I do, and perhaps I'm just trying to poke the beast slightly on this one. And speaking of beasts, the idea of beastly kingdom was always thrown around. This was the idea of mythical creatures that mostly mythical, not real, but this idea of almost like a beastly kingdom, a villain's park, which Disney would have to rely on its IP in order to draw from that, because you can't just make up new bad guys. That would be a little bit weird. So you'd have to draw on that, perhaps. I actually really like the idea of a villain's kingdom sort of theme. This idea is that you could have like Maleficent as one of the main characters. You could have Scar easily incorporated into it. There could be a great attraction where the scene with the hyenas and Scar's up on stage. That could be a great attraction, not least because the music itself is fantastic. And so there's all these options around nighttime shows as well, some sort of evil themed show. Now, I see an issue though with a villain's kingdom or a beastly kingdom, something like that. Is what age are we aiming this at? Disney, through Hollywood Studios, tried to appeal more to a teenage and slightly older market than perhaps the youth side that they're aiming at with a Magic Kingdom. Are you going to actually put off younger families perhaps by having something like a Villain's Kingdom? Are you going to upset the 3-year-old who doesn't understand that this isn't real? And how do you think, Lauren, that a Villain's Kingdom would be perceived regarding the Disney brand and the family image Disney tries to give off?
I do think that it would raise a lot of eyebrows. Is Disney, that this magical, exciting place, is that aging out the children? I don't know, but we do have this Villain's Kingdom coming, don't we?
Well, yeah, this idea of beyond Big Thunder and what's going to happen with, because this idea of a beastly or villain's land has existed for quite literally decades. And so you're right, but do you not think that this would be better served as a whole separate gate rather than just a side bolt-on to something that already exists?
But then I think that you're right in terms of the families might not go there, or they'll go there and think, this isn't Disney, this isn't what I expected. They expect princesses and loveliness and magical and happy. Think about those people who don't do all this research, who don't really know everything about Disney and aren't into the research, people that are just going for that holiday. They get to Beastly Kingdom or whatever we would call it, and they think, this is not the Disney I've been sold.
But then, okay, then let's talk about what could be sufficiently differential or sufficiently different that means that families won't be confused as to what the content is, but it still appeals to different demographics. I think one of the real obvious answers there is a Marvel's themed theme park. Now, for those that don't know, there's interesting and historical, contractual and legal issues east of the Mississippi River with what characters Disney can show, because Universal Studios already had them. So even though Spider-Man, for example, is in the Avengers campus in California, he doesn't appear in Walt Disney World because there was already a Spider-Man ride in Universal Orlando. It is kind of very complex, and there's lots of different permutations, but it's fair to say that the depth and catalog now that the Disney Corporation has, even with some of these characters missing, they could easily get their own theme park. I mean, could you imagine if there was a Deadpool ride? That would be a great hit, and B, it's kind of obvious that isn't aiming towards children. It's kind of obvious that yes, this is a Disney theme park, but the market we're aiming for is teenagers and especially older. What would you think the idea of a Marvel's theme park as the fifth gate at Walt Disney World?
I think amalgamating the two would serve well.
Interesting. Go on.
Heroes versus villains. You get the Marvel aspect, you get the superhero vibe, but you also get that darker side of the villains.
I understand. I do. And to give myself 20 seconds to think about this, as always, if there are any thoughts, comments, or queries, please feel free to email us at monorailmemoirs@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Monorail Memoirs, or leave a comment in the YouTube comment section below, and we will certainly read it. And if it's a question, we'll try and get back to you. Now that I've given myself 20 seconds of thought process time, my problem is part of what is amazing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe that Disney was able to build was the idea of a coherent narrative throughout. You'd be taking that coherent narrative and throwing it out the window for the sake of trying to do two things at the same park. I mean, let's be clear, you could absolutely get enough attractions if your target market is teenagers and older of just Marvel only stuff. You have a Thor ride, easy. Avengers ride, easy. I know we can't take Guardians of the Galaxy out of its current location in Epcot, but that's the sort of ride that you could easily have. You could, of course, do stage shows with various different elements. I mean, Captain America is an easy and obvious one that people could do. And so you're obviously aiming for a certain target market. You could have an entire Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. aspect, which, for those who don't know, was one of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's series that went on for 7 seasons. And we're actually watching it again. We've just finished season 1. It's a fantastic show that links really well into the MCU. But that combined effort, that ability to tell coherent and year-long narratives and storytelling, that's what Disney was always really good at, was storytelling. They've continued that with Marvel, and it would help you get a certain age range, or perhaps a certain target market you're not achieving with the other parks. And it covers off your point, Lauren, that it's kind of obvious that it wouldn't be for young families. You're not going to take a 3-year-old to go watch a Deadpool, you know. For those who haven't seen Deadpool, it is very much age appropriate, but the sort of humor in it is not going to be something you expose a child to. Here's the next thing, though. Do you think the Walt Disney Corporation would want to be that closely tied to something like a Deadpool ride that has got a lot of graphic material in it? Obviously, the language will be of a certain caliber. What would you think the idea of a Deadpool attraction?
I think that it would be great, as you say, for the adults, but I don't think Disney has ever aged a ride, so that would be really difficult. They've heighted a ride, but they've never aged a ride.
So are you saying there would have to be a minimum age for either the attraction or the park itself?
I would say the attraction because, for example, my 4-year-old, he loves Marvel. He loves, I know we can't have any Spider-Man there, but he loves Spider-Man. You know, we've just been to Disneyland Paris and the whole Avengers campus there. Absolutely loved it. He was in his element. I think that telling him, there's a whole park, but you can't go to it, is like taking a kid to a candy store and having a look at the outside of it and going, look at all those lovely candies, but you can't have any of them. It's just cruel. And I also think that for Disney to solely put all of their eggs in one basket, one Marvel-shaped basket, would be very silly of them. Because for those who are not into superheroes, those are not into, you know, Marvel or, you know, MCU or anything like that, they'd think a whole park designed for one IP. Absolutely not.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. What does he think of Deadpool as a 4-year-old?
He's never watched it.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. Right, fine. Okay, that's. I did wonder. Child Protective Services, you are not required. The point that you make though is actually really valid, and you know you would be neglecting a certain target market, and it's what Disney sort of bases its abilities on. Actually, you know, this is not a political or a cultural podcast, and nor is it ever going to be, but it's fair to assess that in the last few years, Disney has taken policy decisions that have raised, let's call them concerns, whether or not you think they're legitimate or not, of some members of society who think Disney should go back more to its family-based roots and family-style entertainment. I'm not saying that is a right or wrong position, but if you start making Deadpool rides, I just think you're going to give that corner of society an even bigger reason to question it. So fine then, let's say not Marvel. What do you think could be a really good approach to have in a fifth gate, if not necessarily a specific theme? What sort of things would you like to see? Are we aiming this more at families? Are we aiming this more at the higher demographic? Are we aiming this at a target market Disney hasn't touched before?
I think we would need to market it for everyone again, because the whole point and the whole ethos that Walt Disney came up with Disneyland is that the whole family can enjoy themselves together. He was sat watching his children on the carousel thinking, I really want to be a part of this. So surely having an age bracket in mind or a certain kind of clientele in mind would completely douse that whole idea of Disney that Walt Disney came up with himself.
You're right, but we're getting into a much deeper topic of how much of Walt Disney World has anything to do with the vision that Walt Disney himself laid out. He died 60 odd years ago, 50 odd years ago, my apologies. That's a long time. For a long period, the mantra in the Walt Disney Corporation was, what would Walt do? And this idea they kept trying to chase what Walt Disney would have thought, but Walt Disney would come up with things that nobody considered to be possible. The idea of a theme park in Central Florida, that's an insane idea. There's no infrastructure. Nobody goes to Orlando. It's just orange groves for miles. Yet now, one could argue it's the theme park capital of the world. So, going back to sort of what Walt wanted, I'm not sure that would be best served for the Walt Disney Company of 2025. But here's another thought for you then. Should Star Wars have been a fifth gate?
I think it should have been part of a fifth gate. But as I say before, don't put all your eggs in one IP basket, because you are knocking out a whole demographic. So, for example, with it being part of Hollywood Studios at the minute, I've ridden those rides and I quite enjoyed them. But would I go to a world or a park totally dedicated to Star Wars? Absolutely not. I've never watched one of those films.
Which is baffling, by the way.
I've never watched a Star Wars, and I don't ever intend to, because I can never say then that I've never watched a Star Wars.
Okay, folks, here's what we're going to do for all the listeners out there, and indeed the watchers. When we get to 100 subscribers, Lauren is going to watch a Star Wars film of my choosing. That's what we're going to do. And then we'll do a short review on it at the start of an episode. So that's the target, folks. When we get to 100 subscribers, Lauren is going to watch a Star Wars film that I decide. And don't worry, it'll be a good one. It'll be a good one. And I'm sure that could be a topic for another time. We could even take a poll. We could even have, interaction with you all listening. So that's the objective. 100 subscribers, Lauren's going to watch a Star Wars film. This wasn't scripted, by the way, so inevitably she's going to find something at some point to turn it back around on me when we hit a different milestone to do something different, which in itself isn't a bad idea. I'm going to throw out it's not a controversial idea. It's an idea that has lots of flaws, and I know why it would never happen, but I'm going to say it anyway. 2 words. Disney Quest. For those who don't know,
I was thinking a similar line. I was thinking technology, but then obviously we've got Tomorrowland. We were saying, in our last episode that we really need to revamp Tomorrowland and give it a lick of paint, do something with it. Could we not incorporate that into Tomorrowland?
Oh, into Tomorrowland. You would have this in Tomorrowland.
As a side of Tomorrowland.
Oh, so to go back to a topic from previous, you would say that an amendment to Tomorrowland, or what would help fix Tomorrowland, is making it have Disney Quest elements in it?
I certainly wouldn't shoot down the idea.
I don't know if I would. I don't know if I'd shoot it down, but I'll be honest, I don't know how it would work, and that's very much some thinking. For those who are really confused by what we said when it came to Disney Quest, Disney Quest opened in what is now Disney Springs, but then Downtown Disney in the late 90s, and it went on for nearly 20 years. This was sort of an indoor but interactive theme park. There are some great videos on YouTube that I would highly commend to watching it, and it had different interactive experiences. One was a Pirates of the Caribbean ride where there was 6 of you in half of a boat. You had sort of 3D glasses on, you had screens around you. And if anyone who's been on Toy Story Midway Mania, the string pull, it was like that, but with a cannon. You get scores and things. There was various other attractions as well, including the name has escaped me. Hyperspace Mountain. This was a Space Mountain equivalent where you actually spent time designing the roller coaster in terms of the number of power rolls it did, the speed it did, and then you got put 2 by 2 in a little simulator, and you would then go and ride the ride you just made, seeing it on the screen. Fantastic attraction. The queue was never that long, especially towards the end of the time, where you think sort of early 2010s period. You may have had to wait 10 or 15 minutes. And yes, it was only a half-day experience, but the nostalgia for Disney Quest is real. I don't know how Disney would go about making a 5th park in a Disney Quest format. There are so many problems with it that the technology changes really quickly. Keeping up with that is hard work. The fact is that it's great indoor activity on a bad weather day in Florida, of which when you get caught in a downpour in Central Florida, you know about it. So there's all these really great, examples of what it could be. And I personally hold some really fond memories in there. I'm sure you do too, Lauren. But
definitely,
it's one of those. I like the idea of a Disney Quest as a 5th game. Is it going to happen? Absolutely not. It just isn't. It just isn't. So allow me to just do one further topic then before we sort of touch on this, before we begin to wrap up today's episode. What if there was a 5th gate that was dedicated to Walt Disney? The idea would be that you'd get things that he did at the 1964-65 World's Fair. You could perhaps even bring back rides from the original Disneyland, but reimagined for the 21st century. And you would actually have a Walt Disney dedicated park. Your thoughts?
My thoughts is that it's limited. I think it's quite a limited idea. I also think that for those that love the old Disney, the nostalgia, we really buy into the idea of Disney and what Walt Disney wanted to create. Great. But is there so few of us that it wouldn't really appeal to the mass market? Those Disney adults, of which we are 2 of them.
Yes,
it would be great. It would be like going into a museum of Walt, essentially. But would that really bring the crowd? Would that bring the family that's there for 2 weeks for a once-in-a-lifetime adventure? Would that really hit the nail on the head for them? Or would they think, what on earth is this all about? This isn't Epic Universe or whatever else they've come to see. It's that you've got to compete with.
This is true, and it's a very fair question. What target market would we be aiming at? It would end up being aimed at the people who go to Disney anyway. So you're not really expanding market capital, but maybe you are freeing up space in the other parks, as you said earlier, for those who are doing the once-in-a-lifetime visit who aren't bothered about Walt Disney as a person or the history behind the parks. I'm not sure where it would go. I'm not sure what you'd be able to put in it. But, I don't know if you know, but Edison Square never was built. There's something around that. You could easily do a Liberty Square as well. Perhaps it's a much smaller scale and probably cheaper endeavor, which I'm sure the Walt Disney Corporation would not be against. But to conclude this episode then, yes, I think we're in agreement. A 5th park would be a good idea. Not really sure how we'd go about it though, and I'm not really sure what the best outcome would be. If you have thoughts or queries, let it be known in the comment section below. Thank you very much, as always, for your viewing, Lauren. Thank you. I also noticed the Big Thunder Mountain T-shirt for those who are watching. Big Thunder Mountain's a great ride. It's a great ride.
Love it.
Is that a little bit too old though? I don't know.
Yes,
Well,
but
I
it's
don't know.
dated.
That is a fair assessment. That is a fair assessment. And so with that, once again, thank you always for your viewing on this episode. We've got another episode next week and every week between now and, well, my view in this one, we don't know how long we're going to do this for. I think I can certainly talk about Disney anyway to anyone, and we'll keep this going for as long as we can. Again, there is no budget on this one. This is just two very passionate Disney fans being able to talk about things and share our thoughts with you, the audience, and we'd love to hear from you. Feedback, positive, negative, but also commentary on what we've discussed or even possibly ideas for future podcasts. So with that in mind, thank you very much, everyone, for your viewing today. And as always, please stand clear of the doors. Bye, everybody.
Bye.